Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're probably not only specifically pointing towards environmental sustainability, but really long-term sustainability, which comes with success. Exactly. Yeah. Talk to me about metrics. Effectively partnering with startups is a key strategy that can make a real difference for companies. Corporate venture funds, venture clienting, hackathons, accelerators, incubators, there are many ways to engage with startups, and it's hard to choose the right one. The 4 most important reasons for choosing a program and the biggest mistakes to avoid when designing such a program, that's what we'll discuss in this episode. Let's go. Paolo, you wrote your first line of code at the age of 7. Let me ask you the question. How does a 7-year-old boy get to write code? And can you recall what you wrote?
Well, I can recall absolutely what I wrote, and it was quite basic in 2 senses. It was also in basic. So I got given my first computer. It was a VIC-20 from Commodore when I was 7. And the first instinct was to play games, but my dad wouldn't allow me unless I wrote some code. Mm-hmm. So the program was something like 10 print what is your name, and 20 input $1 or $A, can't remember the string now, if it was the dollar before or after, and then it would say print hello, comma, your name. But it was like the beginning of what became a bit of a story, because I was allowed to play games only if I was coding. So at one point, my dad found this trick of giving me a book of games, so I could actually copy the basic into the computer and then run the program. And it would be a very basic game, very quaint and very, like there was an asterisk moving around. You have to shoot at it. But it was a way for a 7-year-old to get introduced to programming. I thought it was exposed. It was quite smart of my parents, putting it that way.
Yeah, it was very wise. So the motivation for you to play games, of course, is there, but you were only allowed to do it when writing code. That's very nice. I can relate to this. My very first programming language was QBasic. Right. Where you can select 16 colors and then you can basically, think of yourself how you can create a game from that. So that was a fun time. Yeah.
And where I was doing like programming challenges with my friends, because then a friend got the Commodore 16 that absurdly enough was an upgrade, even though it probably had less memory, I don't know. But and so we were doing like coding challenges. Can you do this color or write these things? Yeah, those were the days.
And how did that, lead you to what you're doing today? I mean, coding at a young age, again, it's one of the best things probably you could do in, understanding, informatics and, even language to some extent. But now, today is all about, leading innovation in different forms. So what lessons did you transfer from your early days to what you're doing today?
That's a great question. I think, it's been an evolution. Technology is clearly an amplifier of human capabilities. So that was clear since the beginning for me. I started my career in technology actually in optics as an electronic engineer. So it was a calling to go back to coding AI later, which is what I do now. What I understood is that the ability of optical communications, so fiber optics, to improve communications was already there, and I was playing only the fine tuning of it. I believe that it was exactly that calling to make technology a lever to improve someone's ability that brought me to AI in the end, artificial intelligence. I think the idea of technologies and amplifiers has always been there. The wheel made people go faster on chariots, and over and over. I mean, computers made us better at computing, at just calculus, and creating like big projects with CAD, etc. Now AI is going to be the new challenge in many senses. It's going to improve our ability to imagine things. Generative AI is proving it. There is a saying that if you can imagine something, then you can produce it. Sometimes the biggest step is really imagining a different world. So I'm very excited by the evolution of AI and generative AI for that aspect. Like every other technology, it takes also the ability of jeopardizing something that we do. I mean, steam engine and electricity changed how people use their strengths, and there was much more space for human strength before machines came around to do things that we are doing, or horses were doing for us. And the same will be for artificial intelligence. We just have to learn how to govern that, which is another thing that comes from coding, I think. As a coder, you have full control on the machine. Sometimes the machine doesn't respond to your controls or does something a bit different than what you expect. And yet, if you're careful enough, you're always the one in control. That at societal level is a bit of a difficult lesson to learn, but we will need to learn it. We have done it hopefully with nuclear power and nuclear bombing. That is a hot issue and will always be. But I'm confident that that with AI we can do the same.
So there is many models on these larger technological changes and even disruptions. One of the models is called the Kondratiev waves, and so you have, because you mentioned the steam engine, so it's believed, or it's said, that the very first of those larger cycles, called Kondratiev cycles, was indeed the steam engine. Second one was, I guess, railway and steel, then electrification, chemicals, then petrochemicals, automobiles, and then already IT, ICT, if you will, and the cloud and the like. And there is an ongoing debate if AI is actually now starting the sixth Kondratiev wave, leading to a new world, if you will. So there is other voices that say it's going to be nanobiotechnologies and things like that. Nobody knows, but it's what you say. The important part of this is that the time between two Kondratiev cycles is getting shorter and shorter. So where you would have about 50 years in the first cycle of the steam engine, you actually just have 25, 30 years for the fifth one, for the IT one, before the next one starts. So it's an interesting discussion about the compression of time. Now, where you are today, you kind of interact and you help big corporates in this innovation jungle, if you will. I'm not saying theater, but in this jungle, in this very complex world to navigate, specifically at the intersection at startup collaborations and startup engagements. Now, in the corporate world, when does setting up a startup partnership program make sense? And based on your experience, what difference can partnering with a startup actually make to a corporate?
Two very good questions. I'll start from the second, probably. So it makes sense to collaborate with startups when in the innovation cycle for a corporation. It can be related to innovating the core, or it can be related to innovating in adjacent markets or in adjacent, like in the future, in the transformative horizon. The model of horizon 1, 2, or 3. So it actually makes sense in all three horizons. In the first horizon, when you're innovating in the core, you always have the decision between build, buy, or partner. And partnering makes sense when the technology that you're looking for is soon to be a commodity. Maybe it's not a commodity today. Very few people or very few companies have it. Especially some startups have it, but you don't. But it will be a commodity. It will not be actually a part of your core value proposition, because also your competitors will get that technology. In those cases, I believe it totally makes sense to partner with a startup. So that you acquire fast that technology. You actually start building layers that create your competitive advantage on top of something that will be a commodity at some point. I think generative AI today is in that stage. There will be not maybe 1,000 players, but probably not even two. There will be a number of players, and cloud was kind of the same. It doesn't really make sense to build your own cloud. It's just to buy a cloud from a producer. Similarly for AI. So that is one scenario. Another scenario is when you are exploring a market where you don't have a presence yet, but you are interested in. So organizations are machines with standardized processes that work well exactly because those processes have been tested and standardized, and then can be repeated at scale. Entering new markets sometimes involves changing those processes, or changing the value proposition, or changing the entry strategy or the marketing strategy. That's when you want to collaborate with a startup that has a foothold in that new market. It gives you time as a corporation to understand that market, restructure your processes, and understand what kind of changes you need to make in order to enter that market. And the partnering could also be, the rent to buy model for houses. Yeah. It could be a partner to buy model, right? So when you want to partner with a startup because eventually you wanna buy it and enter that market through that brand that you bought. So that also makes a lot of sense. And a third case I would say is when the startup is developing a need for your core market. So when they actually develop, say you are a cloud company, that's kind of an easy example to make. So I'll take the low-hanging fruit in this conversation. But when developers of cloud technologies, they saw a possibility in adoption of cloud, they created programs for startups to help startups use the cloud in order to grow their business, so that the demand on the cloud technology would grow. They worked. So so that's another possibility. So when you have a platform technology or any other kind of platform that would grow if that gets used, then you want to engage with startups, increase the demands for your core business, and have basically everyone get a win. The startup goes faster thanks to the technology that you're offering, and at the same time your core business grows thanks to an increased demand. I think I'll stop here. There might be other examples, but these examples also map pretty well on why you may want a program. A program gives a very clear collaboration platform. So platform in a different sense, not technology, but collaboration in this case, to engage with startups. So it's a clear gateway that corporations can create to send a signal to the startup ecosystem, a startup community, that the corporation is ready to collaborate, that has created a process for it, which is really important, it has budget for collaboration. So it creates all the steps that would spare time from a startup to engage with the corporate, which otherwise is like a massive investment for a startup. And a program creates that avenue, lowers the barrier to entry for startups, and it also helps the corporate, if the program has been designed correctly, to speed up internally all the processes that get to realizing the goal. And that is also why I believe there are very different programs for very different goals, depending on what the corporation wants to achieve.
And it's interesting, many of our customers are building those external engagement programs, also with the help of, some digital platforms, in our case, of course, but none of them looks like the other. And I guess you also caution against this, right? In your book, you caution, for example, against a copy-paste approach in setting up those, startup programs, startup engagement programs. So the obvious question would be, why shouldn't I just look at the most successful approaches out there and do exactly what they did?
Another great question. I think the answer is partially in what I said before. The organizations are very different. They are a sum of people, processes, industry, competitors, and goals as well, and objectives, strategy, really. So someone's strategy might be different from yours. Someone's people might be different from yours in terms of what background they have and skills they can offer to startups, and vice versa, what they can take from startups. So that boils down to different needs. So if you copy paste exactly one of the famous models, that might bring you towards the same goals as who created the model. But that wouldn't actually advance your own goals or your own needs. An example is with corporate accelerators. I think that is one of the most evident dazing that happened in the corporate world. I think accelerators are quite successful in the investment world because of an alignment of incentives of what happens in there. So startups join an investor-led accelerator to grow faster. The investors have money to do it and a network to allow them to allow startups to raise their next financial rounds. Because accelerators are typically created by entrepreneurs or investors who have a large network of fellow entrepreneurs and investors ready to put money in, and they can activate that network for you. So it is kind of a growth trajectory for the startup. What corporations want from corporate accelerators is rarely that a startup raises the next round. That could be a fun thing for investors, but it's never the first goal, or very rarely so. So corporate accelerators had the same model as investor-led accelerators, but the goal was completely different, was to create a long-term partnership with startups. And then the means to achieve that goal were wrong, because they were the same means as, investors, but the goal was completely misaligned. That is what brought a lot of corporate accelerators to fail, at least in the corporate sense of failure. I think history will still say that a lot succeeded in other respects. For example, in growing startups and startup ecosystems, but not in gaining tangible revenues or cost savings for companies. So what we are seeing in corporate accelerators is that the model has been twisted or repaired, like I say also in the book, by different players who changed some parts of the model in a way that it actually works for corporations. For example, the goal not being raising the next fund, but closing a deal with the corporation. The content of the corporate accelerator should be changed accordingly. It's not about mentoring for raising funds or changing your business model, but mentoring for how you sell to this corporation or to corporations that participate in that specific program, and how you change your sales process. A lot of startups start with a business model that implies a sales model that is maybe mature for selling to corporates. And within a couple of months or 3 months, they can be made to realize, I didn't want to say taught, but that's actually teaching in a sense. They can be taught how to change their sales model so that corporations can actually buy from them. And it doesn't take 3 years. It takes literally sometimes even 2 weeks or 4 weeks for a startup to change that model. But the realization of it can happen within a program. And so that is one of the reasons why I think you don't want to copy-paste a model that is made by others. And there are other situations that require, sometimes your people is not ready. So you want a lot of interactions from your people with the startups that some other corporations don't need to do, because they already have a good kind of startup procurement process that they put in place, whereas you want to create that startup procurement process. And so you need to educate your own people to do it. I could mention probably another 2 or 3, but I think I'll stop here for the moment. If you want, we'll drive the conversation in that direction again. But yeah, I gave a couple of examples. There's really a tailor-made process that is required because of the complexity of a corporation. You need to see where that complexity lies and make the program solve that complexity for you. That is one of the reasons why you want to program, is that you want to create that sandbox, that avenue that solves the blockers in creating a startup engagement and collaboration for you, right?
So that makes a lot of sense, and I guess it goes down of the path of goal alignment, but also choosing the right tool for the right goals, obviously. And there is many of these quote unquote tools or startup programs. You mentioned, for example, accelerators. There is also incubators. There is corporate venture funds. There is many more. And surely each program is unique in the way they might satisfy goals. They work and they should be designed for a specific purpose or a specific goal. But are there also some common features among them that allow for an effective design management or also improvement over time?
Absolutely. There's a design space available in startup programs, and the design space comes from these common features, duration, for example, or the structure that starts with a recruitment phase. There's always an activation phase where the interactions happen. And then there's a follow-up phase that many people don't design for, which is one of, I think, the major mistakes that first-time startup program designers do. They don't design the follow-up stage where a lot of the value comes for, especially large organizations and corporations and governments, and should be designed for. So there's first of all this structure that is common to hackathons, that is the shortest possible program probably, to incubators, that is, or corporate venture funds that have a very long follow-on, even like 10 years after the investment or the first relationships are curated. There's a big commitment in follow-on because there's an investment. And the other common things are the content. A lot of content in the activation phase is similar. You have mentors in hackathons, you have mentors in incubators, you have mentors in accelerators. And in a sense, you have mentors also in corporate venture funds, because it's people who sit on either the advisory board or even the board of directors of companies, and they help direct the companies by coaching or mentoring the founders within that scope of the BOD. The other things that are in common, well, content again is you could have workshops, you could have lectures, etc. So all these ingredients can be shaped. Duration can be short. An hackathon is really a very short accelerator if you think about it, or vice versa. An accelerator is a very long hackathon. There's always a selection stage. Sometimes it's between the recruitment stage and the activation stage only. Sometimes is at the end, what I call the graduation. So the first is the selection stage, and the second one is the graduation stage. You have another selection over there where you graduate the startups and you promote them. Sometimes you have an intermediate selection stage where at the beginning you have a phase one of the program, and then an intermediate gate, and it's a stage gate model really, and then you have another stage and then another gate. Quite common with innovation processes, right? That was replicated in startup programs. All of these are features that you can tweak and change depending on your goal. The offering can change, and that is a marketing problem. If you want to attract the right startups for you, you need to create features inside the program that resonate with that market. If you want Series B companies, for instance, in your program, and you ask founders to relocate to your city for 12 months, you will never get Series B companies, because founders there are fully booked, they're really busy, and they need to stay near their market, wherever that is. They will never commit 12 months to relocate to your city. So if you design the offering in a way that basically closes doors to the startup market or the startup community that you want to attract, that's a very major design mistake that many people do, unfortunately. So all these things can be really changed and designed in a way that you have a product market fit or a program market fit that attracts the right startups that you want to attract, that match your goals, and that you can also cater with some advantages to make them win by participating to the program.
So it's probably very hard to generalize, but in what sort of situations and goals should you lean towards which type of engagement program? And I realize it's not black or white, and it's probably multifaceted. But still, there might be some common pathways when, for example, choose an incubator versus an accelerator versus a corporate fund maybe. Can you sort of walk us through the typical scenarios?
Yes, it is challenging because, as we said before, it's kind of a tailor process where you want to create really the program that works in your situation. But what we identified in our research that is published in the book is that there are 4 major long-term reasons. There are even short-term reasons why you might want a program, but the 4 major long-term reasons do map quite well on then some characteristics. One reason is you care about the growth of the startups, and that is investors, typical investors, because investors want an exit. So the faster the startup grows and the better it is. That really aligns with financial return. In that case, accelerators make a lot of sense because you push a lot of resources in a very short amount of time. Mm-hmm. You attract startups that really want to grow fast. And at that point, you have the founders in the program that are the main decision makers, who can change the strategy, the approach of the startup, the product, have the decision power to make it. So you condense everything for them in a very short amount of time, be it 3 months, 6 months, 2 months, whatever. And so the accelerator model makes a lot of sense. If instead your goal is the procurement of a solution, a technology that you don't have, or an access to a market that you don't have, you have another kind of need. There you need to create a match with your goals and with your internal processes. You don't forcibly need founders there. So that is a new breed of programs that came out about 10 years ago now, or 6 years ago. They're called in different ways. In Germany, there's the venture client that has been created there, and in other regions of the world they're called collaboration programs or collaboration platforms or stuff. But essentially they don't require sometimes the founders even to attend. They're not as intense as accelerators. They have like very different content. It's more about like how you create the collaboration. The output is a pilot. It's doing something together rather than pitching to investors or raising your next fund. It's actually about testing the performance of the technology within the context of the corporate or the government that runs the program. So that's another breed of programs. So take venture client again, like that in Germany is quite popular. And then you have a third situation where the corporation or government, so a large organization, aims to create an ecosystem around something that I call a platform in a different sense. So it could be a technology platform. I gave the example of cloud technology before. Mm-hmm. Corporations who created that technology want that technology to be adopted, and they want to create an ecosystem of startups that use that technology. It happened when Microsoft and Nokia tried to catch up on Apple in their in the App Store, kind of their App Store, where they created the same ability for startups to code for Windows, and then they wanted to Windows for mobile, and then they wanted startups to create apps for that. It was called App Campus and ran around I think the early 2010s. There are a lot of programs like that where also governments do it. Startup Chile is one example of ecosystem program where you have a platform that is the business ecosystem of Chile, and you want startups to adopt it and actually make business in Chile or have a base there for international operations and so on. So you have this platform that is somehow ready, or you should get ready to be adopted, and then you just bring startups in. What you want really to do is to incentivize the usage of that platform, right? So it's not about raising funds, it's not about a pilot, but it's about like creating a lot of ties and lock in somehow the startup, but in a good way. It should be a win-win, right? The startup showing the value of that platform so that the startup commits to that platform. And the fourth kind of program, and their incubators work pretty well, because you want the duration that allows for those ties to happen. And then the fourth kind of program is when you really care about the founders more than the companies. So even if the company doesn't go well, but the founder develops a transformative maturation or framework in their mindset, so that they then carry that on, and maybe in their next company they succeed. There you have pretty much a wider choice, but it is in terms of models. But that's another very big thing. And think of all the educational programs for students, entrepreneurs, or for early stage startups that even governments put money in. That sometimes happens also with corporations. Corporate social responsibility is a driver. You have this transformational goal that can be achieved by even hackathons. But accelerators that are really intensive and again require the founders to attend. So you have that component where a lot of content can be delivered in a short time that works really well for a transformational impact on people.
So you definitely need to be aware of, your audience, or the startup audience actually want to engage, talking about the time problem founders have, and being part of this. And there is help, of course. I got to know that the startup program strategy canvas, if I'm taking the right name, but at least some sort of strategy canvas is a tool that is front and center of your specific methodology, for example. Could you break the canvas down for me just a bit? And how you would use it in a practical way.
Yes, in the book we had at the beginning like 5 canvases, and we were making canvases like a lot of people do, pretty much too much actually these days, in our opinion. That's why we resolved to having only one, but the very most significant thing that sometimes people get wrong, that is the strategy around the program. It's not, you can do a lot of tactical design. You can decide to have workshop on design thinking instead of having one on, I don't know, programming or coding or whatever. But that's really tactical design. What people get wrong is the fit between 3 major points. One is your organization, so who you are, what you can offer to startups. That's really key. If you are a manufacturer, that what you can offer is very different with respect to whether you are a communication or marketing company. The other thing is your objectives and goals. I've covered them with the examples before. If your goal is about creating a collaboration with a startup, don't do something that investors would do. That's really not. That you would attract the wrong startups for what you want to achieve. So you need to clarify your objectives really, really well, and hopefully also your KPIs. And then the third circle in our canvas, the third point is what startups you can actually reach. So what is the startup community around you that could participate in the program? If you establish that community is a local community, you can put in the program features like attendance that is really, or local attendance that could work. But if you understand that the startup community that will solve your goals and would profit from what you can offer is not local, then all of your program needs to be remote. This is a simple example, but there are some other decisions in your design that depend on what kind of startup community you want to attract. What is your target market really for startups? So these three circles we're missing one to form the ikigai, the Japanese 4 circles of who you are, what you love, what you can be paid for, and what the world wants from you, right? And this is the reason to exist in Japanese culture, and it's the reason to exist for a program as well. So if you sort out those 3 circles, and in fact, the 4th could have been sustainability. So what you can be paid for is sustainability, but in fact, in a corporate environment, that kind of coincides with your objectives. So if you deliver on your objectives, you make the program sustainable. So we collapse 2 circles into one. Yeah. So we have only 3. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you're probably not only specifically pointing towards environmental sustainability, but really long-term sustainability, which comes with success. Exactly. Yeah. Talk to me about metrics. When designing such a startup program, how can, and again, it's probably depending on the type of program, but still, how could you use some early metrics or maybe even KPIs to show that you're on the right track with this, that they are aligned with your innovation goals or the purpose of the program, and actually report impact? I mean, sure, if you're, for example, a corporate venture fund, and your goal is to, 10 or 15x, well, of course, a KPI would be that 10 or 15x for sure. But there might be also leading indicators where it makes sense to check in and say, well, are we on the right track with this prior to the ultimate outcome? So what would you do in terms of metrics and KPIs for the programs?
I'll start from one definition of intelligence. One of my favorite definitions of intelligence is you're intelligent if you're context aware and you change your decision-making process and your decisions based on the context where you are. And that applies to KPIs too. KPIs are really, really the key to open your context. So for me, a KPI is something that keeps everyone aligned, stakeholders, participants, the project team, the program team, on what can be achieved and should be achieved. You want to choose your KPIs based on what you want to achieve. It shouldn't be the opposite. You shouldn't compare your corporate accelerators. That is one of the major mistakes that I believe has been made in historically with accelerators, comparing a corporate government accelerators with the same metrics as an investor-led accelerator. You're not trying to achieve the same goal, so you shouldn't use the same KPIs in terms of how much fund is being raised at the end of it. And that applies to all programs. If you have clarified the objectives, typically the KPIs follow quite easily. I'll give you an example. So you actually said it correctly. So if you have growth as an objective, like in investor-led programs, then early traction can be a leading indicator of that 10x or 15x that you will eventually get. And another indicator is your ability to raise funds. So the volume of funds that you raise within the first 6, 12, 24 months after the end of the program is an early indicator of that 10x, 15x exit that will happen at some point. If you're trying to achieve a core innovation in your core business, whether that comes from, a soon to be commoditized technology or an improvement, you're not interested in that. What you want to see is an early performance improvement, and that's why a pilot is usually a good tool, because you want to measure your baseline of what you can achieve today with your current process or your current technology, and you want to see a % improvement in the pilot on that performance that is key to open up the revenue stream, for example, or get you a competitive advantage to then gain more traction later in the market. So performance is a good KPI for solution sourcing kind of programs. For ecosystem building programs, your final goal is retention. So you want a startup to adopt your platform and stay with it, whether that's cloud computing, Chile, or locally business ecosystem, or whatever, or a co-working space. So you want people to adopt that. So usage is typically a good sign. So if a startup burns through those credits that you gave them at the beginning of the program very quickly, that's a really good sign. So you want to optimize that. You want them to understand the value that they're getting from the platform, interact with the platform a lot, so measure the interactions. I summarize within usage a lot of different possible KPIs that could be an instantiation of that. With the transformational impact, what you want to see is that people actually apply what they're learning. So they're good learners. So, for example, in a course, you want them to run a lot of interviews or a lot of build, learn, measure cycles, so that they actually get that as a way of thinking, a way of working, reframing the world in that way of experimental attitude towards business building, not just as a scientific methodology and so on. So these are examples of, how number of cycles of build, learn, measure. That's a very good early indicator of success for transformative impact kind of programs. It really does depend, but the one thing that is really difficult in corporations is to realign all of your stakeholders that is the right KPI for you.
Yep.
And that needs to be done possibly even before opening the first call for startups. If you don't have that big alignment inside your internal stakeholders, then people don't understand what the program is doing. And obviously, they will start doubting the value, right? If you identify the right KPI that works in your context, so again, like you're intelligent, you're smart, you're context aware, and you work out the KPI that aligns your internal stakeholders, then you try to deliver on that KPI, that is going to deliver value for real. And sometimes it takes time to discover that KPI or group of KPIs. So what you want to do, that is, I think what you were suggesting in the question, that is also very smart. You want to evolve your KPIs in time. So the first few programs, you want to learn. So you have KPIs for you to learn. For example, can we attract startups of this kind with this kind of offering? So a KPI for you could be, in the first round of the program, could be number of applicants. That you just want to see if your marketing offering, your marketing campaign, your brand is appealing for that startup community. It could be number of applicants in general, and it could be number of applicants in target. So of the kind of startups that you want to actually attract. And then, but that can be a KPI that is good for the first round, but it becomes a vanity KPI if you keep it for the second and third round as well. In the second and third round, you want to evolve that KPI into something more concrete. And it can be, it's a learning process depending on what kind of of program team you have, the experience of that program team. That also has an impact on the KPIs. At the beginning, the program team might be learning as well. So you want to put objectives that they can achieve, but then can be leading indicators of success later. When the program team is more experienced, and then they don't have to focus anymore on marketing or attracting startups, they can focus on, okay, now the pilot needs to work. So now in round 2, you really want to show me that performance increase, and you want to show me that you can select the right startups. And sometimes it's not only the program team, but also the internal business unit that needs to collaborate with startups. So putting maybe a performance objective on round 1 is very aggressive, but keeping that in the background for round 1 could be a smart thing. But in round 2, you probably want to put them forward and say also to the engineering team that needs to collaborate now, guys, now you need to commit resources and make the pilot work and show that performance that we need for the business to achieve our goals. So it is smart to fine-tune the KPIs as you go, especially if it's the first time you adopt a program.
Yeah, it's a very comparable thing that we see for other corporate innovation vehicles. So not, startup engagements, for example, but even internal innovation efforts, corporate innovation efforts. When a new corporate innovation unit starts, oftentimes, you start measuring around how many people can we engage internally, how many ideas can we collect, things like that. And after the first year, into the second year, questions start around, business impact for sure. Like, what does it, do to the business? What is actually contributing to the business? So your KPIs change over time, for sure. And there is a point in time where you need to be confident about results you can deliver, and not just people you can engage, which could be an early, KPI, but then later, obviously, it is aligning with the goals and then delivering on that. So that's the quantitative side of it. Another side is culture clash. So, of course, founders of startups and managers and seasoned executives in corporates, they tend to be different. So there could be a clash in language, speed, vision, being driven by vision, even goals, obviously. So based on your work, what do you think are some of the mechanics of fostering a productive relationship between the people of startups and the corporates? And how could you help align and lower the consequences of such a culture clash?
That's such a big problem in organizations, because a lot of people who work in large organizations, they stay there and they're not in startups, or they're not entrepreneurs themselves, solo entrepreneurs or consultants. They are in big organizations because they like predictability, and they like organizational structure. And we're all different. Some people really foster when they can focus on what they can do and they do best, rather than worry about all the little fringe problems that, for example, a startup founder has to solve, right? Refocusing costs brain power, as we all know. So people who work in large organizations typically are kind of people that strive in an environment where they can focus on what they can leverage the most in terms of their skills. Moving those people out of their comfort zone is typically more difficult than for other kinds of personalities. So it is, it's not good or bad, it's just the way it is, right? And the ability of a program to change that usually is correlated with showing results and showing that startups can help. That is the most powerful thing. And there's a leading kind of trailing indicator towards that is the time spent in contact with startups. So what I try to do when I have a cultural objective is to optimize the quality and the quantity of time spent between corporate managers and startup entrepreneurs. One thing that worked out really well in the past for programs I was involved in was creating mixed teams where from a hackathon to an accelerator, where you have a corporate manager that is actually part of the startup team for a while. They try to solve the same problems. They act as advisors. Sometimes they even get a stake in the game. For example, a part of their MBO, management bonus, is tied to the success of a pilot, or they even get a share because they become an advisor on the company, so they get a 0 point something, which should also be tied to some kind of more incentive in terms of career inside the corporation. That is more concrete with employees typically. So the ability of spending time and actually living the life of a startup founder, that is something that worked quite well. Changes the reference point, the framework of people, puts them a little bit out of their comfort zone, not too much, because they are not pushed out to become entrepreneurs, but they live like entrepreneurs for a while. And that is a nice way of doing it.
Yeah, that sounds very practical. Practical advice. And if we would debunk some of the myths in that vast landscape, what would be the one misconception that you wish to dispel, maybe for both seasoned entrepreneurs, but also younger ones when it comes to collaborating with corporates? Certainly there is expectations and ideas when starting a collaboration with corporates, but what's some of the myths that we should debunk today?
Well, I'll start with one that was told to one of my colleagues very recently, and he resented a little bit. The corporates are dinosaurs, it's true that corporations are delivery machines. So they deliver around their core business, and they have a responsibility because they have clients, right? And they have shareholders if they are public companies. So they need to deliver on that business model, on those processes. Is that a sin? No, it's not sin. It's actually what, we buy food every day that is produced by corporations. That's actually really good for our, not sustainability, but our everyday life and our health. And we take drugs that are delivered by corporations, and the drug needs to be always effective, right? So again, that's really good. They're not dinosaurs because they are, it's a backward culture. A lot of times, there are incredible employees with a great vision that even like collaborating with startups. They really follow the technology landscape. They would like to do things. It just takes a lot of time and a lot of internal, not politics, but games a little bit to realign a machine that is delivering towards A to also deliver towards B. I mean, ambidexterity, like exploration, exploitation. These are all models that in the past have tried to describe this situation, which is just a reality. So it's not that corporates are dinosaurs. They just need time. Programs can help because if they're designed well, the program team has already done the homework of realigning part of those processes in order to be startup friendly, and then participating in a program especially an established program that has already shown some traction and results after the first 1 or 2 rounds is a good thing for startups, because that collaboration has already been streamlined for them. There are many other myths, I think, but for example, corporates being organized. Sometimes they are, especially on delivering the value proposition. Sometimes it's just a question of like people really are in their silo, meaning if you're a good employee, you try to do your job well. And if you try to do your job well, a lot of energy goes into that thing, your job, right? So getting out of that job takes some time, and then it's misorganization. So getting out of that organized tunnel that is your day-to-day activity can be very disorganized. So in that sense, pulling people out, changing a process can be very disorganized. And that's another myth. Startups need to be a bit patient. Sometimes even, pulling the jacket a little bit can help. And providing from the startups, providing that organization. So be present at the appointments, arrive prepared, doing some homework for what the corporate manager should have done in theory. But come on, they are also busy with their day-to-day job and their MBO and like kind of objectives. So if the startup helps the corporate do their job, that typically is a win-win for everyone.
It is, and also know your numbers. That's something we've seen a lot in those discussions between corporate and startups, because obviously the last sentence you said is spot on, right? It's of course helping the corporates achieving oftentimes a very important or solving a very important part of the puzzle. But when it comes to these interactions, yes, those people in the corporates as the founders of the startups are super busy. So if you're in those early stages, want to understand if you gain some traction, if you get some whatever results from the metrics and KPIs you're measuring, you should better know your numbers, and not in a meeting go like, oh yeah, sure, sales. Well, let's pull up some of the recent dashboards and taking 3 minutes to find those numbers. It's really about knowing your numbers. That helps a lot in those situations. Yeah.
Absolutely, and especially when corporates need to prove the value of the collaboration, the numbers are data is fundamental in that, of course.
Paolo, this has been a fantastic conversation. It's very, very insightful. I feel there is much more we could go through it in greater detail. But I think it's a good time to mention that if you want to learn more about this in greater detail, we will make sure that we link the book you've written, in the show notes. So it's a very good one, and it details much of the conversation we had, which we unfortunately only could go through on a very superficial level. But still, to me, this has been very, very insightful. But before the conversation ends, Paolo, we do have a new tradition on this podcast. And the tradition is that the previous guest leaves a question for my next guest without knowing who my next guest is and what we're going to talk about. So there's a question for you, and it's an interesting one. Take your time.
Let's go. You had told me it would come, but obviously I don't know the question. So
no,
let's see.
No, I just received it this morning from my previous guest. So the question that's being left for you, Paolo, is: what is the vision of your future self?
That is a very interesting question. As I solved that, I would probably be my future self as well. I think there's always a challenge in imagination. I think I could ask generative AI to try to design for me a few future self scenarios based on where I stand now, and then choose among them. That would be an interesting exercise I haven't done yet. So designing my vision of future self with AI, it could be a challenge for everyone. I'm challenging the audience also to do it as a thing. I believe that different people take satisfaction in life from different sources. My personal one, given my personality type as well, I do these tests and they all confirm what I already know. That is, I'm pretty much a workaholic. Also because my satisfaction mostly comes from the impact that I have. So, and one of the reasons of writing a book is really try to reach out to a larger audience with some of the teachings that don't only come from my experience, but also from the 100 plus people we interviewed for this book. So the vision for the future self is trying to find the levers that I can pull with my humble skills and from my humble perspective and the point where I stand to improve that impact in a possible way to impact as many people in a positive way, as many people as possible in the planet as well, which it becomes more and more evident that needs help. And we're navigating our future all together for probably the first time in history that through globalization and globalization of pollution, we now are on the same boat, clearly lost in universe, and we need to collaborate. So I think enhancing these collaboration opportunities and a culture of global collaboration, I think, could be, and it goes with developing entrepreneurial ecosystems and developing AI as well. It kind of points towards all the same direction that I hope I can contribute to in the future.
It does, and let's see where we are in 10 years. Very, very interesting, though. So that's it for this episode. Paolo, thanks again so much for being my guest. It was a pleasure, getting the insights. I learned a lot today, and I hope everybody did as well. So thanks for being my guest.
Oh, thank you for having me here and for the very interesting questions. Some of them were not easy, so thank you very much.
And to our listeners, if you haven't subscribed to this podcast yet, please go ahead and do so. It's a small thing to do, and it will help us continue to make this show better and better. So my promise to you is that we will continue to do our best to deliver exceptional value at no cost to you. So if you're not already a subscriber, please go subscribe now. Thank you for listening. Take care, and bye-bye.